This is Ask Congress, the international portal, the political portal that can bring you to every member of Parliament throughout the world. And we're happy to have with us today one of the most distinguished members of Congress, Congressman John Conyers of Michigan.
Greetings and salutations. I am now the Dean of the House of Representatives.
You are. And
we most senior member.
And we came here together.
Yes, and if you were still here, we'd be co-deans.
Yes, but if I was still here, I couldn't take it. What is going on today in this Congress? I mean, the fact of so much conflict instead of cooperation. How do you feel about what's going on?
I remember the early days when we first got here, Lester, as being worse. I mean, there were caucuses that didn't want to desegregate.
Oh, yes.
We had wide groups in disagreement, and it was, to me, very troublesome because I had the support of Dr. Martin Luther King, and the whole idea of bringing in more people of diversity into the Congress was not looked upon by many as a great idea.
Well, I remember when I first came here, I worked with Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yes, Mississippi. I went down there many times with her, and she was one of those people that was fearless, and she took a lot of abuse. They threw things at her. She was beaten up. Her life was threatened.
Well, I remember we had a divided delegation for the first time as to who would be seated, if you remember that.
Yes, yes.
There were two delegations from Mississippi. She headed one, and then I've forgotten who headed the other one. But the fact is that we couldn't seat her at the time.
That's right.
No, I think you're so right on the way of the question of Congress coming together on the basis of the individual and the racial overtones that have existed.
Well, desegregation in many parts of the South was a way of life, and you were talking about ending desegregation. The African American vote was just beginning to come up, and the conservatives rightly feared that if you let everybody register and vote, you would be sending more and more members of Congress from the South who were of color. And now, of course, we have the great John Lewis from Atlanta, who was a civil rights leader himself. That's what got him started.
Right. Well, you have been in there in the fight for the rights of all people, which is such due credit to you. I marched with Medgar Evers.
Wow.
And I have a long history
you do.
In the civil rights movement.
Right.
But that same situation seems to exist today in denying the vote to people of color.
Well, there are two schools of thought, but before I get back to that, I just wanted you to know that I marched with Dr. Martin Luther King, who was the inspiration for me, and he was fearless. He was a fabulous orator. He was a great writer. And most of all, he was a leader. He wasn't just an academician or a theoretical philosopher, all that. He would get out there in the streets and lead people, and that's what built up the courage and fortitude and made everybody stick to it to make sure we got to where we wanted to go.
Well, if it hadn't been for people like you, where would this country be today? The fact is that even with all the things that have gone on and what you and other leaders of the African American community, if you hadn't been in there in the first part and stuck to the idea of providing the opportunity for people to participate in government, this government would never exist as it exists today.
Well, I credit Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with keeping us all together. He was the great leader, and I introduced the first bill to make his birthday a national legal holiday.
Right?
And people said, well, I'll go on it, John, but you know, an African American getting a birthday for his civil rights work, that's going to be a long haul. But I'll do it anyway. I don't think it'll pass. I had so many people say that, but we kept building up. And then the funny thing, after King had departed this earth, the animus, the people that didn't like him, began to quiet down, and the people that realized what a great leader we had among us kept growing, and he became famous all over the world.
That's right.
You know, he traveled the world. He got all the national awards and international awards that he could, and so it kept building up till we finally, after it took a little while to get enough support on it to get the bill going, but it did because the critics began to quiet down, and the people said, look, we've lost a great American. And I still think that Martin Luther King, if you said just name one person in the 20th century in the United States, John, that's who I would name.
Right. But you've been a leader in a number of things, and we're going to have to go to break in a few moments. But I want to discuss with you the whole question of health care, because you've been in the forefront of leading the Congress to some either answer or something that would bring health care to all the country.
Well, it's the important thing is not only staying alive, but being healthy. And you can't be healthy unless you have whatever health services are needed. And you can't have health services that are needed unless you can get them without being asked to tell us who your health insurer is, or can you pay cash or credit, or what are you going to do? And that, before we got to this point with Medicaid under Medicare, it was really tough.
John, I want to go into it more in detail now of where we stand right after the break. We've been talking to Congressman John Conyers, who at one point was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and now sits as the ranking member of that committee, an important committee when it comes to the whole question of health care and possible impeachment.
Well, you know, when I first came to Congress, the first thing I did was go to the Speaker of the House, John McCormack.
McCormack, that's right.
I went to him and said, welcome, I'm so glad to meet you. I would like to go on the House Judiciary Committee because of civil rights and voter rights. He said, well, I can't help you there because we have a chairman of the Committee on Committees named Wilbur Mills of Arkansas. He said, you have to go to him first. So I went to the chairman, Mills, and asked him, and he said, I can't guarantee you anything because there are other members that want to do things too, and I can't predict how we're going to work this out because there were a great number of new people being elected, like you and me. So we went there. He said he'd do what he could do, and the chairman of Judiciary was Emanuel Sella.
From Brooklyn.
Right. And I went to him as well, and finally they announced that they would put me on the committee that I asked for, which is pretty unusual for a freshman.
That's right.
And I was delighted, and that's how I started out.
John.
And I've been on that committee ever since.
Well, you've actually participated in some of the really earth-shaking decisions that were made on that committee. But tell me, John, on the question of health care, where do we sit now?
Well, we're coming a long way. As you know, Lester, these things move incrementally. We just saw a massive defeat of a conservative plan to, I don't know what they were trying to do. It was put together so hastily that went down to defeat. Trying to put this in place of any serious consideration of universal health care.
Well, that's what you have been in favor of all along.
Yes, single payer is...
Yeah, but you have also advocated the idea of Medicare for all, have you not?
Well, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's another way of saying universal health care and single payer. And there are countries that are doing this in Europe and successfully for a long time. And what we would do there is say from the minute you're born, as a matter of fact, before you're born, your mother, in your mother's womb, you're going to be insured. You're going to be taken care of. She's going to get the proper natal care that she deserves. And then when you're born, you have health care because everybody in the country that has this, right.
That's the big point.
Yeah, and that's where we're going, and that's where single payer goes, because there are places now, particularly in less urban areas, where you have to go for a couple of hours to get to a hospital. Well, sometimes your health requires you get there much sooner than that.
Well, the objection has always been for people who don't want to participate because they're not liable to that type of health problem. But you know, in my area, we have school taxes. Now, I have to pay taxes whether I have kids in school or not.
That's right.
And somebody paid for my kids before me. And isn't that the same situation?
It is. There's a definite relationship between the two kinds of care that we would provide in terms of education, which is very critical. We now want to help communities with preschool, pre-K, where before they get to the grade level, and we found that youngsters do immeasurably better in grade school if they've had pre-K before they're old enough to even go to the first grade.
It's better to spend money on that than a wall, huh?
Oh, gosh, yes.
John, I want to ask you something. The whole question, Judiciary Committee had, as we remember, the Nixon impeachment.
Oh, yes.
So many people have been dissatisfied in this country now and are talking about the whole situation of overcoming some of the things that our current president has initiated. You sitting as the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, is there any talk of impeachment?
Where? In the committee?
Yes.
No. What we're trying to do now is move ahead without impeachment because the conservatives are in control of the House and the Senate. Not to mention also the administration, the White House itself. But here's the thing, Lester. We would get into a big fight over that and
accomplish nothing.
And it would have to be some incredible series of failures. What we're arguing with the current president about is whether we should adopt more liberal policies and build on the Obama administration's accomplishments, or whether we should do what some people are insisting that President Trump do, is to throw out as much Obama accomplishments as possible, and let's make government smaller. Let's relieve the tax obligation of the wealthiest among us, and certainly we don't want to entertain any notions of extending Medicaid to people who can't afford anything, and that's what we're up against now, and so. We're not talking about throwing Mr. Trump out, but we're keeping track. You know, sometimes people are their own worst enemies. He's doing more to make people realize that they may have made a mistake in giving him a vote. He was like a fresh voice from the outside. But now they're finding out that his people are cutting back programs that the poor, the seniors, even the youth have enjoyed in terms of health care, in terms of education.
Are you optimistic of the future?
Sure, absolutely, because I see every week the attitudes beginning to shift. No president has had a lower rating in terms of popularity than this president since Richard Nixon.
John, I want to thank you very much for being here with us again. You're one of my oldest and constant participants on Ask Congress.
I hope I can come back again at least two more times. Thank you so much, Lester.
And now until next week at the same time, this is Lester Wolff saying So long from Congress. Look at that.
Great.